All right. So like we said, fetal circulation, there's going to be a few specialized structures on here. We don't have a table because they don't have numbers. But when you look through those paragraphs on vessels 3-4, that page, you can see that there are going to be 6 structures that we have to know. And again, these are structures that are going to be allowing the blood to get to and from the placenta that we see down here, as well as some shortcuts between the two sides of the heart. Because in the adult heart, of course, we are importantly separating deoxygenated blood on the right side from the left side. But in the fetal circulation, rather than having gas exchange occurring in the pulmonary circuit, the gas exchange is occurring down here with the placenta. So, in fact, we have a mixture of deoxygenated and oxygenated blood on the sides of the fetal heart, and that's okay. All right, so starting with some of the structures that we saw in the adult heart, remember we had the ligamentum arteriosum, that white fibrous connection between the pulmonary trunk and the arch of the aorta. So in fact, in the fetal circulation, right here, we have an artery that's called the ductus arteriosus. So it's right here. There's a little junction between the pulmonary trunk and the arch of the aorta, right here. So in the fetal heart, it's called the ductus arteriosus, and in the adult heart, it closes up and it remains as kind of a fibrous connection that we call the ligamentum arteriosum. Okay? So this is what it looks like in the fetal heart that we see right there. The other thing we saw is that on the wall, the intraatrial wall, we had the fossa ovalis before. Remember that indentation through here? But in fact, in the fetal heart, it is a foramen ovale instead. So you can actually, it's not a magic trick. What we're seeing there is where blood can pass directly from the right atrium to the left atrium through a hole, an oval-shaped hole that's called the foramen ovale instead. Okay? So on a lab practical, we'd probably have a stick just like this with tags on either end. It might be whatever, number 43, name this hole. Foramen ovale. Okay? In the adult heart, it was called the fossa ovalis instead. It should close up and heal over. Sometimes you hear about people having a patent foramen ovale where it's not totally sealed off. And that means that in that adult, they're getting a mixture of deoxygenated and oxygenated blood. And they can go their whole lives and not really know it, but then all of a sudden they start to stress their heart. Maybe they start training for something or doing athletics, and all of a sudden they're not feeling quite right. And so they go and check it out, do an ultrasound, etc., and they can see that there's actually some blood that's still passing between those two chambers. In any case, in the fetal circulation, it should be there. It should be the foramen ovale. So that's two things that we see in terms of shortcuts through the heart. The other things that we see, of course, we have the umbilicus here, right? That goes down to the placenta. So the placenta is something that we identify in this model. This round structure down here is the placenta. And we have to get blood out to the placenta to exchange gases and nutrients and waste products, etc., and blood back from the placenta to the fetal circulation. So to get blood out to it, there are going to be arteries going from the fetal circulation out to the placenta. So these are going to be arteries away from the fetal heart. We see two of them right here in kind of a dull purple color along here. These are umbilical arteries. So they're coming here. They actually branch off of the internal iliac arteries, and they come up here, and then they go into the umbilicus like this. Bink. So those arteries, those umbilical arteries are going through here, and they come out here. The blue vessels that we see out here are part of the umbilical arteries. And so if we look closely at them, we can see the arrow going out. These blue vessels are the umbilical arteries. Just like the pulmonary circulation, the coloration is opposite because the gas exchange is occurring out here, right? So umbilical arteries are named so because they're going away from the fetal heart, but they're blue because they're going out here to pick up a fresh load of oxygen. On the flip side of the coin, we see a red vessel with the arrow going back. That's the umbilical vein. There's two umbilical arteries. There's one umbilical vein. We see it in red here. It goes through the umbilicus like this, and then after it exits here, we can see a small section of it right here. So the paint's kind of chipped on this one, but this section right here is another place where we can see the umbilical vein. So the umbilical vein ultimately is working its way with this oxygenated blood back towards the fetal heart, and there is an additional connection that's going to get it there. See this curve right here? There's this arch right here. going, kind of bypassing the liver. This is called the ductus venosus. We had a ductus arteriosus up here taking blood away from the heart. This is a ductus venosus that is taking blood back to the fetal heart. It's taking it from the umbilical vein, dumping it basically into the inferior vena cava to go into the heart. Okay? So this is the ductus venosus underneath here. So to review, ductus arteriosus up here, foramen ovale that we have going through there, umbilical arteries going through there, and then showing up as blue vessels out here, umbilical vein, red vessel here, going through the umbilicus, showing up again right here, before dumping into the ductus venosus that we see as this kind of arch that's right there. Okay? So these umbilical arteries and veins that we see here, much like the ligamentum arteriosum there, these close up as well, right? So you cut the umbilicus, right? You cut the umbilical cord, and that seals over and heals over, right? The little bit that's still there kind of dries up and falls off. Those connections, those vessels that are connections on the inside, those also close up and dry up. But there's still a connective tissue remnant of them. So in fact, if you are studying for the exam next week and you inadvertently are getting lint out of your navel or something like that, you got to do that every once in a while. So in any case, if you have your finger in your navel and you really kind of move it around, you can actually feel an internal pull that will go down even towards your pelvis as those ligaments are still attached there. Again, they're not functional vessels, but they still have a connection from the umbilicus there down towards those internal iliac arteries. So you can actually feel it. Okay? Later on, I know you'll be trying it. You're looking weird now, but you'll be doing it. Okay, so those are the things that we're going to see on the fetal circulation model. Okay, those 6 things. So those will be back there. Take a look at those. The other thing that we see is we have one other model. That's a unique model that is this one. Okay, and recognize it this way. Now we use this in 201 to look at the different structures of the brain, right? Different lobes of the cerebrum, the cerebellum, the brainstem. There's our pituitary gland, etc. But when we look in here, we can see some of the meninges, right? So for instance, this is all dura mater through here. We can see some of the vasculature. So this is going to be some of the dural sinus is going to go on top of the head where the cerebral spinal fluid ends up going back in. But we can see veins here and we see arteries. We can see some branches of vertebral arteries, but there's a loop right here that goes around where the pituitary gland sits. Remember how there's this little indentation, the sphenoid bone? It's called the sella turcica. There's a loop of arteries that goes around it. We can see part of the loop there. There's a little bit of the loop that's at here. That loop right there is where a lot of the arteries that supply the inferior surface of the brain, a lot of the areas of the brain, come off. And so this loop is significant. They call it the circle of Bruce. No, the circle of Willis. Yes, circle of Willis is what that is called. So these arteries that are encircling that pituitary gland right there is called the circle of Willis. It's like the only thing that you're going to see on this model. Okay, so if you see this model on the lab practical, there's going to be a sticker right over here. And it's going to say name this vessel, and you're going to call it circle of Willis. Okay, so that's really the only reason that we would have this model that we see here on the lab practical. Okay, so those are 2 additional models that you should take a look at sometime today when you're finishing up with models.